My name is Matt Moore. I'm chairman of the State Republican Party here in South Carolina. It's an honor to be with you. Also a member of the advisory committee for USGLC here in South Carolina. I can't tell you the profound impact that Liz's leadership and her staff's leadership has had in my both professional life and personal life, and learning about the issues they are so valiantly struggling to help across the world. So thank you for that, Liz, and for letting me be here today. Thank you very much. Thank you, KT and Admiral Mullen, for that very thought-provoking discussion in the ways that global engagement can play a vital role in protecting our national security. Now, I have some breaking news for you today. Democrats and Republicans don't agree on a whole lot. I'm sure many of you are well aware of that. They do agree on one thing, and that explains why Jamie Harrison, my Democrat counterpart, is also on the advisory committee here in South Carolina, that we cannot retreat from American values and leadership in the world. And those things are very important. So no matter if you see our challenges and our engagement in the world through the lenses of security or economics and trade or of values, nonetheless, they are all very important. Our primary here in South Carolina, Republicans' primary, is just 30 days away. We are quickly approaching a very important time here in South Carolina and the country, and we're excited as Republicans and Democrats to hopefully engage those candidates for president on very serious issues and on the kinds of issues they'll deal with as president and those dramatic challenges and the turbulent times we face here throughout the world. USGLC's Impacts 2016 initiative seeks to educate the candidates and their campaigns on the importance of continuing strategic investments in all the tools of our national power that are used to advance our economic security, our national security, and our values, those things that I mentioned earlier. I was proud last year to sit in a meeting with Governor Rick Perry in Washington, D.C., and have a conversation with him and some of the GLC staff about these very things. So as the campaign heats up, I'd say it's pretty much boiling over right now. As the conversation heats up, it's even more important that we address these challenges to make sure the candidates that will be seeking the White House and seeking seats in Congress next year understand the need to use all the tools in our toolbox to advance our interests around the world. Now, Liz mentioned that I had the opportunity a little over a year ago to visit Africa with GLC in sub-Saharan Africa, my first time in Africa, to see how America's overseas investments benefit our security, our interests, and our economic interests and our values. I did see firsthand how our development programs are partnering with American businesses and nonprofits to build a more stable and peaceful and economically stable societies there. What I saw most of all, and this is a personal anecdote, is the amazing hope of the African people. Sometimes we get caught up in the news and the cable news and the talking heads, and it seems as though the world is a bleak place, and I admit that in some places it certainly is. But to see the hope in the people's eyes there was just simply inspiring to me, and what that means for the next decades and centuries in Africa. As I've said, American leadership, I think, and our values require embracing development in that part of the world and the diplomacy programs to make it happen. That is for a safer and better world in Africa and beyond. Our primary here in South Carolina gives us a unique platform to, I think, showcase to those seeking to be our next commander-in-chief that we here and you all in this very room understand that in an interconnected world, there is no pulling back. And as Admiral Mullen said, no retreating and no substitute for American leadership in the world. So I encourage all of you involved here on social media, out as you go to events in the next weeks, to remind those candidates and their campaigns that we need to use a range of tools to keep America safe, to get our goods to ports across the world, and of course to show our values in each part of the world as well. So with that all that said, we are very proud today to welcome a very distinguished group of representatives from all some of the campaigns here nationally. And they're going to discuss with us the role of America in the world and what is at stake in their opinions in 2016. So now I want to introduce our panelists today from four campaigns. And first of all, Brigadier General Zais from the Bush campaign. General, if you'd come up. General Zais, I'll add a personal note, was our superintendent of schools here in South Carolina, statewide over the past 4 years, did a wonderful job in that. Colonel Christopher Bourne with the Carson campaign. Former South Carolina Attorney General Charlie Condon with the Cruz campaign. And Congressman Mike Pompeo with the Rubio campaign. Please join me in welcoming this distinguished group. And KT McFarland.
While the gentleman gets seated, I just want to say we're really honored to have gentlemen of this quality. No ladies, though. Well, anyway, gentlemen of this quality to represent 4 of the leading presidential candidates. As Liz and others have said, we sent out invitations to all the candidates, and we're really honored that you guys could take the time to speak. I am going to grill them all, ask them a series of questions, and so it's not boring. I'm going to ask them all different questions. And I think that it's, I'd like to actually take a page out of President Reagan's playbook and put these questions really into 3 categories. 1, national security. 2, America's economic leadership in the world. And then finally, American values. You know, national security, which is my field and your field, is usually a sleeper of a political issue. Nobody cares about it. Everybody votes their pocketbooks, and all politics are local, but not this time. This time, national security is one of the most, and probably the most important issue on a lot of people's minds. And since 9/11, America's military leaders have been the clearest voices in expressing the fact that it can't just be a military solution, that it's got to be development, diplomacy, alongside a strong national defense that not only keeps us safe but prevents conflicts. We've just heard Admiral Mullen very eloquently say, you know, you don't kill yourself to this. You got to develop. I mean, it's a lot cheaper to put money into foreign assistance and development assistance than it is sending in soldiers. So I would now like to turn, in no particular order, but to Attorney General Condon, who's representing Senator Cruz. Senator Cruz has said that he sees the fight with ISIS as an ideological war. And in addition to the military, what does Senator Cruz think we need to win this ideological battle?
I appreciate the question, and I first want to thank you all for being here and hosting this important discussion. And by way of background, I just want to let you know that I've known Ted, gosh, I was thinking about the other day, that I believe I met him, I was one of George Bush's co-chairmen here in South Carolina. And I believe at that point in time I met Ted Cruz, and I've known him for decades. And what I have found in knowing him, and by the way, he really made a national reputation when he was a Texas Solicitor General, but he's a family man, he's a man of faith, and he's somebody that you know when he says something on the campaign trail, he's got a proven record, he'll actually do it as an elected official. And so the question you asked relative to his view on ISIS is an important one. And mind you, I'm an extremely poor surrogate for Ted. I'd be the first to say this because he is an extremely bright man. He is just terrific. But Ted, he's the first one to say that our fight against ISIS is not an isolated battle. It is part of our larger fight against Islamic supremacism that has been at war with the United States and the West for decades. It attacked us in Beirut in 1983. It attacked us on 9/11. It attacked at Fort Hood and San Bernardino. This threat has many elements: Sunni, Shiite, nation-state, terrorist group, but the genocidal desire to destroy anyone who does not agree with the universal imposition of radical Islam is the same. It's the same threat. For starters, we need a president willing to utter the words, radical Islamic terrorism, then direct his administration to guard our country from this scourge. If you call it workplace violence or violent extremism, you wind up fighting everything and so nothing. In the face of this threat, as with the twin ideological threats of fascism and communism in the 20th century, we will have to call evil by its name, then summon the will to defeat it.
Thank you. Colonel Bourne, I was really struck when Dr. Carson at one of the last debates, he said that American foreign policy and his foreign policy would be proactive, not reactive. So in addition to a strong national defense, what are the key non-military elements of a proactive foreign policy that we would see in a Carson administration?
Well, thanks for the question, KT, and thanks everyone for coming to hear from all of the candidates. So Dr. Carson looks at the world through a number of lenses, but he would particularly look at restoring U.S. global leadership as probably the most important element of his foreign policy. U.S. leadership is indispensable in the world, and the world is safer when the United States has a clear and resolute foreign policy. He would look also to revitalize key alliances and to reverse the idea of leading from behind. You lead from the front. The United States, as the indispensable nation, would resume that position. We would restore our alliances and restore faith in the United States by reversing things or not engaging in things such as the Iran deal, such as the imposition of red lines that were then, once crossed, were ignored. He would restore the relationship with Israel, and he would certainly restore the United States' relationship with Jordan. So revitalizing our alliances is key. He'd also look to revive the U.S. economy, because without a strong U.S. economy, obviously we cannot have a strong defense or strong diplomacy. That is a key element of any foreign policy that Dr. Carson would initiate. Most important, and particularly with respect to ISIS, is the intellectual or informational element of our foreign strategy. We are in a war of ideas, and the Obama administration has decided to disarm unilaterally. The enemy we face, while a small percentage of Muslims around the world, does in fact have an ideology that is rooted in Islam. It is rooted in their interpretation of Islamic law. Dr. Carson recognizes that. Dr. Carson has not been shy about talking about that and bringing that forward. In order for us to succeed against this ideological enemy, we will need to, throughout the government, to study the ideology that motivates these people. We have been, over the last several years, unable to, actually prevented from studying what motivates the enemy. And that would be Dr. Carson's first move, would be to start to study and to learn from what motivates the enemy. In that way, then we can begin to get ahead of his decisions, begin to get ahead of his actions, and start to be able to take them down. It is very similar to the approach that Ronald Reagan took when he was addressing Soviet communism. He was also addressing a radical and tyrannical ideology. He did that non-militarily. He was able to cause the fall of the Soviet Union without us firing a shot.
Thank you very much, Colonel. I want to turn to Congressman Pompeo. You work with Senator Rubio on Capitol Hill. You're in the House, he's in the Senate. And Senator Rubio has been a feisty and ardent, strident proponent of a strong national security and a strong United States military. But he's also talked about the other essential elements of national security. So how do those civilian tools reinforce his desire for a strong military?
KT, thanks for the question. Thank you all for being here. I feel like I've gotten to know South Carolina. I've spent the last 18 months working with Trey Gowdy on the Benghazi Committee, and I now know South Carolina in ways I thought I would never know. Also a Rubio supporter, and it is worth noting. Senator Rubio has, from his first day as a member of the United States Senate, known that America had to engage. And he's not only known it, he has lived it. He's lived it. You can look at his voting record, you can look at his actions. And his idea for this next American century is that we will be global leaders. And we'll certainly do that through American strength, a strong defense. He'll certainly do it through American prosperity and making sure that we have the economic tools, the capacity. Admiral Mullen talked about $19 trillion in debt. that we have the economic capacity to do it, but he also understands that American values are at the very center of what global leadership is really about. There are lots of pieces to that Senator Rubio has worked very, very hard on. They include supporting when it's not always easy. I've seen this. I've been in Congress 5 years. It is not always easy to go back home and talk to your constituents about why it's appropriate to support these other countries and to provide resources for them, to let America go help in these very, very difficult and desperate places. And Senator Rubio has continued to do that in his entire time. That bodes well for him as Commander-in-Chief, because when things get tough, you can be sure that Senator Rubio won't turn tail. He won't change his vision. He won't talk one day about America having no dog in the fight in Syria, and the next day talk about the fact that we want to bomb them back till the sand glows. We all know, those of us who serve in the military know that's not the appropriate solution for how to address the very real challenges that are presented in Iraq and in Syria and Lebanon and our allies in Jordan and those who share our interests in the Gulf states as well. And he recognizes that we have to have partners in those places. He's prepared to do the right thing, the difficult thing, to talk to them. Where we have conflict, find solutions and look for answers and use rhetoric that is appropriate to ensure that those other tools. Senator Rubio voted for a very important piece of legislation that each year comes before Congress. It's called the National Defense Authorization Act. Other candidates for president, Senator Cruz, chose not to. This last time, it provided resources to the Ukraine. So those who talk about wanting to push back against Vladimir Putin have to be prepared to go do the things that are right to make sure that the resources that are available for those countries are there, and they come from us in America. That same NDA had important resources for our allies in the South China Sea, those on the perimeter. To vote against that piece of legislation doesn't bode well for those who are now asking for your trust to be the next Commander-in-Chief. Senator Rubio is someone I've known now for coming up on 5 years. I've worked alongside him on global food issues, another important issue to keep America safe, that we don't have famine and starvation, causing the very thing that Admiral Mullen talked about, folks who want to put on bomb vests instead of engage in the American or the global chain of commerce. Senator Rubio will always defend those. He'll be there, and I'm very hopeful that he'll be our next president of the United States.
Thank you very much, Congressman Pompeo. Now let me turn finally to you, General Zais. You know, Governor Bush has talked about, obviously, a strong national security, but he's really emphasized alliances and recreating some of the alliance structures we've had in the past to defeat not only communism during the Cold War, but now radical Islam. Could you elaborate on that? How do those elements come together in a Bush presidency?
Well, thank you for that question. And I think Bush's remarks demonstrate that he understands that national power has four major components: military power, diplomatic power, economic power, and information power, the power of information. For example, the Soviet Union didn't collapse because of the might of our carrier battle groups, armored divisions, fighter squadrons, or nuclear triad. The Soviet Union collapsed because the Soviet people came to understand, in no small measure due to Radio Free Europe and Voice of America, that they did not enjoy the freedoms and the prosperity of the West, and to understand that in order to enjoy those freedoms and prosperity, they had to replace their own government. The point is, strong military is not the only component of a strong national government. It's one of four components, all of which must be employed in a coherent and integrated fashion. Governor Bush understands this, and all of his speeches have demonstrated this. He understands that economic sanctions, backed by strong alliances, coupled with a credible and capable military, are all necessary to secure American interests abroad. Our problem is our current administration doesn't use these tools in an integrated and comprehensive fashion. For example, we heard Admiral Mullen say that Jordan has about 1 million refugees right now. Jordan has a well-organized and well-trained military. Where's the Jordanian military in the fight against ISIS or the Assad regime? Our NATO ally Turkey shares a 500-mile border with Syria. They're housing about 1.8 million refugees. Their army is large, well-equipped, and well-trained. Yet the Turkish contribution to this fight has been negligible. What about the powerful Allied air coalition that we heard about so many months ago? The fact is, 95% of the airstrikes are conducted by American forces. Where's the Saudi Air Force? Where's the Kuwaiti Air Force? And where are our European friends? Governor Bush understands that a lack of a meaningful coalition in the Middle East proves the abject failure of this administration to employ diplomacy, to build strong alliances, or develop a strategy to achieve national security objectives. In other words, this administration is long on lofty rhetoric, but short on meaningful results. Governor Bush, on the other hand, will provide the steady leadership and the strategic vision needed to achieve U.S. national security objectives overseas.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to switch to a different topic. Okay, we've dealt with radical Islam and America's national security strategy, which every one of you has talked about as not just being the armed forces of the United States, but the other elements of national power. For those of us who have been through one round of wars, we know that after Vietnam, for example, even after the Cold War, the tendency of the United States is to say, okay, we've done that, now let's focus on what's wrong at home, and let's focus on rebuilding the United States. The American public is sort of at the crossroads now, and the political parties are as well. What is our role in the world? What is our role for advancing American values? What good does it get us? Is there some self-interest in this? But also, is there some American national interest where we think we're different, we think we're special? Americans around the country, through their faith-based groups and parishes, synagogues, and other organizations, have really reinforced America's core values overseas. And their strategic investments in reducing poverty around the world have shown really remarkable results. Just for statistics, the number of people around the world living in extreme poverty has been cut in half. The number of children dying from preventable diseases such as malaria, tuberculosis, diarrhea, that's been cut in half. And as several people pointed out, we're almost to the point where we're curing HIV/AIDS, or preventing it, or certainly reducing its lethality in many parts of the world. So thanks to all these efforts, the United States has been a leader in promoting American values and also prosperity, because a country which is a thriving, rising country is in fact a good trading partner for the United States. Let's be honest about it. But we now have this national tendency to say enough already. We've got the debt. We've got to rebuild America. What should our role in the world be? We don't want to fight any more wars, but on the other hand, we don't really want to retreat. So how do your candidates, how do they sort of bridge that gap? Where is the middle place between that? And I'd like to turn to Colonel Bourne first, if I could. Dr. Carson went to the Jordanian refugee camps, and in watching his comments while he was there and when he returned home, he was quite struck. He really saw the value of American humanitarian assistance, and he saw the sort of despair in that part of the world. So for Dr. Carson, how do those humanitarian efforts advance our own self-interest and embody American values?
Well, that's a great question. And as a guy, probably the only guy in the race who has a medical school and a hospital in Nigeria named after him, who has performed surgery and separating conjoined twins in a number of countries around the world, Dr. Carson fully understands and appreciates the impact of the United States and its humanitarian efforts around the world, and the message that sends to less developed or to the citizens of lesser developed countries. Dr. Carson, around Thanksgiving time, did go to Jordan to visit the refugee camps. The Jordanians are hosting about 1.4 million refugees from Syria. They have the capacity to host many more. That's the reason that Dr. Carson went, was to sort of cut through the fog and a lot of the noise on the campaign and in the public about the Syrian refugees, and to find out for himself, to get ground truth, what the situation on the ground was, what the situation with the Jordanian government was, and what were the wishes of the individual refugees themselves. and he found a couple of things. First of all, the vast majority of the refugees have no desire to come to the United States. Surprise, surprise, they want to go home. They would like to return to a peaceful Syria and return to their lives. So that's thing number one. You don't hear that in the press. Dr. Carson went and on the ground found that out. And the second thing was the level of effort that Jordan and the other countries on the periphery of Syria are performing to support the refugees. It's incredible. And what he learned from that was their capacity is there. What they need from us is not for us to take some tiny percentage of the total. I think the president had talked about 10,000, which compared against 1.4 million is insignificant, and 4.6 million total refugees registered by the UN. Probably many more who are not registered. So 10,000 is an insignificant gesture. The best way for us to respond to that crisis is to help the people who are on the ground, who have the capacity and are willing and are best culturally suited to interface and to help the refugees from Syria. So that's what Dr. Carson found. He's kind of a get in there and find out the answer, get ground truth sort of guy in his own quiet way. And that would be his response to your question, KT.
Thank you. Let me now turn to General Zais. Governor Bush has talked about PEPFAR and the effort in Africa, the U.S. effort, the U.S.-led effort to solve the problem and cure AIDS in Africa as one of the greatest success stories in the past 20 years, and yet nobody knows anything about it. Africa's kind of the forgotten country. We're focused on the Middle East, we're focused on China, we're focused on Europe and the refugee crisis, and we've sort of forgotten about one of America's greatest success stories, which is what we have done in Africa. So talk to us about, as Governor Bush and then potentially as President Jeb Bush, how does he see programs like that strengthening America's role as the shining city on the hill and the country that is the one indispensable nation?
Well, for background for our audience, PEPFAR is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, and you've heard about it a lot today. Governor Bush understands that in addition to the enormous suffering caused by AIDS, high mortality rates contribute to high poverty rates. It means single-parent families. It means orphans. It means national investment in education is lost when workers die prematurely. And in an environment where early death is not unlikely, people are far less likely to save, invest, and work for the future, and far more likely to live for today. Similarly, poverty contributes to instability, and instability threatens U.S. economic interest abroad. American companies don't want to invest where there's the threat of terrorism, rebels, insurgents, or government overthrow. Governor Bush gets it. He understands that when used effectively, aid abroad is more than charity. It also advances U.S. economic and national security interests, as well as enhances our moral standing among the community of nations. But Governor Bush also understands that aid that is funneled through corrupt, and we heard Admiral Mullen talk about that, or incompetent regimes far too often does not get to those for whom it is intended to benefit. Governor Bush is committed to ensuring that countries receiving our aid dollars abide by standards of transparency and demonstrate that the hard-earned American taxpayer dollars have the intended effect, not just simply enriching the ruling oligarchs.
Excellent answer, thank you. Let me turn to you, Attorney General Condon. Senator Cruz, who is a pretty straightforward, he doesn't mince words, he has talked about the humanitarian assistance crisis in the Middle East. He's talked about the refugee crisis, not only in Europe, but potentially in the United States. So let's put aside the notion or the issue now of refugees in the United States, refugees in Europe, and focus on the humanitarian crisis that's happening in the Middle East, and particularly in Syria and Iraq and in Kurdistan. We tend to look at it and say there's a fight of Islamic jihad, it's ISIS, it's taking over territory, it's potentially threatening the United States. But there's a massive humanitarian crisis as well. How would President Cruz deal with that?
Thanks for the question. I'm glad you noted that Ted is a straight talker. I mean, if you think things in Washington are great and you don't want to change anything, I don't think he's your man. But if you want a straight talker and somebody that's actually going to do what he says, take a look at him. I had the privilege of being with Ted last week throughout South Carolina. And I might note we had some really, really large crowds. And Ted talks about the need for American exceptionalism, the need for strong American leadership. But on the specific issue that you've talked about relative to Syria, let me tell you what he's pointed out. He has pointed out that the United States, when you talk about humanitarian aid going to the Syrian crisis, we lead the entire world by a factor of 10. And Ted certainly supports that type of American leadership. And the American people, Ted notes, they've traditionally responded with great generosity to humanitarian crises. And that is what we can and should continue to do. And we need to assist our close allies in the region, especially Jordan. And Ted believes that supporting Jordan in this effort is both in our humanitarian and equally, and perhaps more importantly, our national security interests. And that is we should continue to do that. And I should point out to my friend here from Kansas that Ted also doesn't believe in amnesty for illegal immigrants. He believes that a strong border where we actually enforce our immigration laws is necessary for our national security. Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, I'm going to turn to you, Congressman Pompeo. Senator Rubio has talked about the role of women in the third world and educating women and bringing them into the workforce. The World Bank and various other groups have said that a society which has women who are educated and in the workforce has something like a 40% increase in GNP as a result of including women. And Senator Rubio has been very strong and very outspoken in his advocacy of women's rights and women around the world. Now, if Senator Clinton is the other candidate, and Senator Rubio is running against Senator Clinton, and Senator Clinton has made it her point to talk about the role of women in the world and advocacy of women, especially in the third world. Tell me about Senator Rubio. How is he going to deal with that one?
So I think Senator Clinton's going to have a very difficult time, whoever her opponent is, talking about the things that she has done and her record with respect to this. Senator Rubio, to the contrary, hasn't just talked about this. He has spent his time as a member of the United Senate acting on it. He has proposed legislation called Every Woman Counts, an attempt to take the simple task of places that don't even register women when they're born, so there's no record. There's no way for them to become part of society. There's no way for them to be even noticed or considered when decisions are made, whether they're political decisions or community decisions. And he has worked tirelessly on behalf of those that don't have a voice and can't reach these despots, these dictators, or have the ability to have their message heard. He's worked on it in places like Afghanistan, too, to make sure that these folks have opportunities for education. Admiral Mullen talked about the importance of that. And he has made sure that each time American aid went to these nations to provide assistance with their educational programs, that those programs were spread not only to the male population, but to the young women in those countries as well, so that the next generation of leaders in those nations will take into account 100% of the folks in that country and not just a small fraction of the population. It's important to him selfishly, I think. He thinks it's an American national security interest for sure, and that it's in our best interest to ensure that happens, but I think he also understands that these critical values, the ones that everyone in this room holds today, ought to be a part of the leadership that America exhibits. It's not the case that America can be out there and create democracies in every small pocket of the world. But it is the case that every place that America has an interest and expresses its leadership, Senator Rubio understands that it is important that our values are attached to that leadership. That is, we're not just transferring dollars, we're not just handing a check to someone, but we're actually advancing our value set. I spoke a bit ago that I worked with Senator Rubio on a global food issue. It actually resulted from the fact that there were some soldiers from the Big Red One who had gone to Africa to help teach Africans how to farm. And I was talking to Senator Rubio about a program and how that had all come to be, whether or not it was the military's best role, who were the right people to actually execute that mission, and how it was that we were going to tie all the great practices that U.S. agriculture has developed to the people of the world so that they too could have the opportunities to feed themselves and take care of their own nations. I actually met with about half a dozen senators, and Senator Rubio was the only one who took the time to think about it, work on it, and get alongside me to make that program come to fruition. I think it's deeply connected to the work he's done on behalf of women in these difficult places, and I am confident that as president, he'll continue to spread those same values all around the world.
Thank you. I'm going to put a little bit of personal spin on this. When I worked for President Reagan and wrote speeches for him, he would always talk about peace through strength. Ronald Reagan is the patron saint of the Republican Party. I think we'll all agree on that. And every Republican candidate from everything from dog catcher to president says, I'm for peace through strength. But it's often used to just evoke the military part of the equation. And when President Reagan talked about it, he had a much bigger picture. He was for peace, he was for strength, but it wasn't the peace of conquest. It wasn't the peace of capitulation. And it wasn't just the strength of our armed forces. It was the strength of our economy and our values. So I'd really like to just go through in order, starting with you, General, and ask about Governor Bush. How does he see peace through strength? I assume he's in favor of it. I mean, who's against it, right? And what is his vision of peace through strength?
Well, we heard today about the importance of leadership from Admiral Mullen. And it's hard to have strength anywhere if you have poor leadership. I would note that Governor Bush is a resolute, measured, confident, mature, experienced leader who is steady under pressure. He's not a loud voice in the crowd, and you heard our governor talk about some of the angry voices. And he understands that the first task of the President of the United States, and he said this, is to keep America safe, to be the commander-in-chief. And he said, and I quote, peace through strength at home and cooperation with allies abroad. Under our current administration, our enemies don't fear us, and our allies don't trust us. I know that Governor Bush will build trust with our allies and have a military that our enemies will fear.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to you, Colonel. I have heard Dr. Carson, when he's asked, what's your foreign policy, he consistently says, I believe, like Reagan did, in peace through strength. Would you like to articulate and expand on and put some meat on those bones? What does Dr. Carson mean? What does peace to strength mean for Dr. Carson?
Dr. Carson believes that strength should be used in the service of peace. Military strength, certainly. Economic strength to back up that military strength, actually to enable that military strength. Moral strength in the decision-making and the relationships that we have. Strong relationships with friends and allies around the world. That is strength in the service of peace. He sees the use of military force certainly as a last resort, but it has to be a resort. And the people on the other side of the diplomatic table have to understand that should it be necessary, the United States can and will force an issue. We would, of course, and Dr. Carson would, of course, prefer to be able to talk through and resolve an issue together, but force always has to be part of the equation. Complex problems such as Iraq and Afghanistan, however, aren't amenable solely to force. Certainly there's a force component. Dr. Carson would recognize that. But there were times during the breakdown, the long 30-year breakdown in Afghanistan, where the imposition or interposition of a little bit of leadership on the part of the United States, economic and moral strength on the part of the United States could have averted or turned the course of events that have resulted in us being where we are. That's the kind of thought process that Dr. Carson goes through, or will go through, as he leads the nation in dealing with some of these complex problems around the world. He sees development, particularly, as an investment in peace in the future. Development in education particularly of women and girls around the world, development in terms of infrastructure, medical care, maternal and infant health, prevention of disease, all of these sorts of things that the United States is very good at and that we need to ensure that we are investing in, help to prevent conflicts from arising in the first place. This, again, is an example of economic and moral strength in the service of peace. So again, I think just to sum up is that he sees strength as multifaceted, and he sees that the United States should use its strength in the service of peace.
Thank you. Now, let me turn to you, Attorney General Condon. In my conversations with Senator Cruz, he has said that Ronald Reagan was the reason he got involved in public service and has been his inspiration and guiding light throughout. So how would Senator Cruz define peace through strength?
Terrific question. You're exactly right. And as the Admiral pointed out, the key aspect of American strength is we've got to get this economy here in our country going again. Ted's talked about our growth rate needs to be at 5%. We have to get our engine going where our real strength comes from. And I'm really excited about this. I know my brother's a CPA. He may be less excited, but he's talked about a 10% flat tax, a tax that you can fill out on a postcard, and it's on his website. This can be done. We can unleash this economic engine in this country, and we can get stronger again. He's pushing, I haven't heard this for years in Republican circles, we need this. Term limits in the Congress, no offense, and, great, glad to hear that. And the Supreme, right, and been there, and the Supreme Court. He is, pardon the South Carolina down home and dirty here, but he's the real deal. And you talk about President Reagan, I think we have the opportunity for the first time in decades to put another tried and true conservative in the White House. And on ISIS, I've heard Ted say this, and he'll say it much better than I do. Our strategy is really simple. We win, they lose. Thank you.
Congressman Pompeo, I better hurry up and ask you this question before you're out of a job. In talking to, the first time I heard Senator Rubio was at CPAC. It's the Conservative Political Action Conference in Washington. It was a number of years ago. And he was very optimistic. And many people at the time said, where did he come from? He sounds like Reagan again with his voice of optimism and his message. When Senator Rubio, who has thought about these issues as well, how does he see peace through strength? What's his vision?
KT, his vision is an optimistic one of great resolve. And I think as the next Commander-in-Chief, that may be one of the most important tasks is that steady hand at the till, who, when they say something, will actually execute against those words that were articulated. And they'll share a message around the world that we can be your best friend or your worst nightmare. And I'll share with you when you'll be each, and we'll tell you exactly where the lines are, and when you cross them, we'll behave precisely the way I described. And I think Senator Rubio's public life has demonstrated that he is a man that can do that. He sees it along multiple dimensions too, KT. We talked a lot about our military. He has supported the things that are going on down at Fort Jackson and here in South Carolina, all across the country to make sure our veterans are taken care of and that soldiers get paid in a way that's appropriate. But there are lots of other dimensions as well. And those are sometimes difficult for elected officials, certainly a commander-in-chief, to go to the American people and talk to them about important intelligence collection programs that they're frankly pretty riled up about. And some senators turned tail and said, no, I won't support those intelligence collection programs, and programs that are incredibly important at keeping events like San Bernardino to be infrequent and relatively minor compared to the risks that Admiral Mullen spoke about. Senator Rubio never flinched. He has spent enough time looking at the program to understand its safety, to understand the oversight, to understand how it's constitutional, and he has defended that incredibly important intelligence program to his constituents and to America, and knows that it's important. Not every member of the United States Senate has done that. We'll talk about trade. Controversial too. In states like South Carolina and Kansas, sometimes folks aren't exactly sure if trade's in their best interest. When the Trade Promotion Authority came before the United States Senate, Senator Rubio understood that engagement in the world through commerce was one of the best ways to achieve the global leadership that we all up here today are talking about and that the candidates on the trail have talked about. Senator Rubio didn't flinch and supported it. And there was another difficult moment during my time. It was when a man named Edward Snowden leaked more military secrets than any other American has ever leaked in the history of the universe. And it was difficult because you'd go back home and you'd have folks say, what the heck is America doing? Senator Rubio never, ever called Edward Snowden a good public servant. He called him precisely what he is, perhaps the greatest traitor to the United States in the history of our country. That's the kind of steady hand, that's the kind of resolve that I think we need. And when you talk about peace through strength, it's that quiet resolve and strength that I think Senator Rubio will bring to our country if he's elected.
Thank you. I'm going to now ask each of the four surrogates to talk about, just in a short phrase, what encapsulates their candidate's vision for where America should be. And I would just point out that Reagan not only talked about peace through strength, but he talked about America as the shining city on a hill. And when, in his farewell remarks to the American people, he said what he was most proud of was that he restored America's leadership role in the world. So let me turn first to you, Colonel. Colonel Bourne, how does Dr. Carson see America's global leadership role, and what is his vision for America?
Well, thanks, KT. I think I'd first like to talk about steady hands, because I think we heard a little bit about that. And if you can imagine how steady Dr. Carson's hands are, to hold someone's life in his hands for a surgery lasting 17 hours. The stamina, the focus, the concentration, the steadiness. He'll bring all of those things to the office of President of the United States if he is elected. And I think what he would say, I know what he would say, of America's role is that by its moral authority, its economic strength, and its military power, the United States is the world's most indispensable nation and the last best hope on earth for peace and freedom for all of mankind.
Well said. Now let me turn to you, Attorney General Condon. You're a former politician. If you had to put in a simple, quick phrase, what is Senator Cruz's vision from the world, what would that phrase be?
Well, Ted will be here over the next month, so I hope you can see him in person. But as you know, his dad is an immigrant from Cuba. And Ted very eloquently speaks of this. If we don't preserve our freedom and our liberties here in this country, where do we go? And I would never have thought that as an American citizen, this brings up the biggest piece of legislation this current president has pushed through, Obamacare. How is it possible that the Congress makes it illegal and forces me to buy health insurance? How is that possible in this great country? Our liberty is slipping away. And if you put a conservative, a tried and true conservative in the White House, that liberty that we all cherish will be protected, protected, protected. Thank you.
Thank you. Congressman Pompeo, what is Senator Rubio's soundbite phrase for how he sees America's leadership role in the world?
So Senator Rubio talks about a new American century, and that's another century where America is the leader around the world. So he's certainly talking about things that happen here inside the United States, but he is also talking about a new American century. We sometimes think that America has passed from the global stage. That's not the case. Under the leadership of Senator Rubio, it would rise again to have another American century around the world where we were in fact the leaders, and the values that America cares so deeply about were instilled all across the world and much to the benefit of those of us who are living here.
And then I'm going to give you, General Zais, the last word. What does Governor Bush see as America's global leadership role in the world?
Governor Bush understands that we can't rebuild our military, address the national debt, fund international development without a strong economy at home. Governor Bush will work to remove regulations that stifle business, develop a tax plan that encourages economic growth, and repatriates tax money made overseas by American companies that they will not bring back because of a very onerous tax. He knows that every rule, every policy, every law, every regulation tells people what they must or may not do, and in every instance limits freedom of choice and incrementally makes the American people less free. He will work to unburden American business from regulation and foster economic development to achieve our international objectives.
Thank you, gentlemen, and on behalf of the people in this room and really the people in this country, I thank you all for taking the time and the effort to be engaged, and particularly to thank the candidates whom you represent. It's not easy running for president. It's not easy running for anything. And the fact that every one of them is willing to give up part of their life in a quest to make America great again, I think we all thank you for your efforts, and please pass along to your candidates. And before I turn this over to Liz Schreier, I just want to say to the people of South Carolina, you started us on this experiment in 1776. And we are now looking to you. The nation is looking to you to tell us where to go next. So thank you for your attention, and I'm going to turn it over to the wonderful Liz Schreier.
How about a big thank you to KT, who is absolutely phenomenal. Amazing. I'll tell you, after Admiral Mullen and I turned and said, boy, we need her in government. You're fabulous. I just want to thank everybody. Admiral Mullen, in 20 minutes on stage, I've never heard anybody as quoted as often. You can pack more in that 20 minutes that we're all going to go home and think and replay, and how much you taught us and educated us and made us think about how we have to engage in the world, the threats in the world, and the opportunities in the world. And on behalf of all of us, we thank you for your service, and thank you for sharing your day with us today. Thank you. And I add with KT, it's not easy, as you said, running for president, and each of the four of you had to kind of put yourselves aside, and you had to channel your candidates, and we thank you for giving up your time, and the candidates who have all continued to voice their vision for America's role in the world, and we ask you to carry on our message and your message for being here. But there's no free lunch, so now it's up to you. And here's my request for you. The USGLC, we are not here to ask you for anything more than your voice. And my question for your voice and my request is really simple. When I was a young girl growing up in Chicago, Illinois, I got involved in politics for one reason. I was involved in something called the Soviet Jewry movement. I found out that there were people over in then the Soviet Union who literally could not get out of their country because of religious persecution. And it boggled my mind that there were people that I could go down to from suburban Illinois into the city. I could petition in the middle of the city and walk around to rallies and say, let our people go, because there were people in a place that I thought I would never go in my life, people I would never meet in my life, to say they should be allowed to go wherever they wanted. And I could petition, let alone vote, someday when I'd be old enough, to go and make sure that there was freedom and democracy in the world. And here we are many, many, many years later, and we have chance to not just vote, but we can talk to surrogates for candidates, and we can talk, and you can talk because you have a front row seat to talk to candidates yourself about what's important to you. And I urge you, and my request and our reason for being here, as I said from the get-go, is really simple. To urge you to take the time when the candidates come to visit you over the next few weeks and beyond, when it comes to your congressmen and your senators as well, to say that it matters to you that America continues to play a leadership role in the world, and that one of the tools in the toolkit, as Matt said, are the tools of development and diplomacy, because we know if they are used effectively, they work to advance our security, to advance our economic interests, and to advance our belief of who we are as people and as Americans. And I am confident if each and every one of you do that over the next few weeks, that we will together do what we care each and every day at the USGLC, which is to build a better, a safer, more prosperous world. So I thank you for giving of your voice for the next few weeks and beyond, and look forward to partnering with you for many days and years ahead. Enjoy your afternoon, and thank you for joining us again.